Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Gisela Vincente, I'm already halfway home, Armando said, holding the wheel with one hand and the phone with the other. The road is absolutely terrible. I'm not going back. On the other end of the line, the chief of the hospital where Armando had worked for 10 years begged him to come back and perform emergency surgery on a patient with acute appendicitis. Armando had already performed one 2-hour surgery today. There were no complications, but he was very tired. Actually, he had been tired a lot lately. In 6 months, he could have already started to prepare his papers for retirement. His experience as a surgeon was enormous, but the fatigue was accumulating and was draining his strength. Gisela Vincente, Armando continued, Paulo Toro is on shift now. He can handle it without my help. It's time for him to start performing surgeries himself, and he can handle a patient with appendicitis. Believe me, he can do it. The guy may not be confident, but he's very smart. Armando finished the conversation and took the steering wheel with both hands. It was the end of November, but it was snowing heavily today, so he could barely see the road ahead. The snow, which had melted during the day, was already frozen by evening and rustled under the wheels of the car as if it were broken glass. I'm so sick of it. Armando thought, I'll retire soon and forget the hospital like a bad dream. I'll travel around the world and see how people live in other countries. I'll get a tan in the sun, lie on the sand by the sea, drink a cold lemonade, and smoke good tobacco. But last year, almost the whole world was in lockdown because of COVID-19 and the borders were closed. A huge section of the hospital was isolated for coronavirus patients. There was not enough oxygen and ventilators in the intensive care unit, and there were not enough beds. And even though they transformed this coronavirus section into an isolated red zone, not many doctors followed the precautionary measures. Moreover, many of them did not even believe in the real existence of such a deadly virus. Such an attitude seemed strange to Armando because there were too many deaths in the hospital. Armando sighed heavily, and he really wanted to get rid of all this mess, and at the same time, he was afraid of it. So his thoughts of traveling to the hot countries were only naive attempts to convince himself that it was time to retire. In reality, he had no idea how he was going to live and what he could do 24 hours a day without his job. That annoyed him from time to time, but still, he loved that job. He could not yet imagine his life in the future. He frowned and hit the gas a little harder as he wanted to get home as soon as possible. And at that moment he saw a huge dark silhouette in the headlights, covered with snowflakes flying towards it. He hit the brakes sharply, the car scraped through the icy crumbs, spun twice around its axis, and stopped. The seatbelt painfully pressed against his chest. A meter away in front of him, Armando saw a huge moose, standing absolutely calm, twitching its legs and blowing thick clouds of steam from its nostrils. The moose was looking straight at him. The light of the headlights was mirrored in the animal's eyes as red embers. Armando's heart was beating frantically. He was lucky that he hadn't been swept to the side of the road into the woods and overturned the car. The moose nodded its head, wagged its terrifyingly large horns, and walked slowly to the other side of the road. Armando waited for a moment, wrapped in the exhaust fumes, and then he drove forward, looking intently at the road. But before he even had driven 20 meters, he saw a new obstacle ahead. A human body, slightly covered with snow, was lying in the middle of the road. It was hard to believe everything that was happening, but there was no reason for Armando to doubt the reality. He got out of the car and approached the body. It was a girl wearing only her underwear. Armando palpated her pulse. Her heart was barely beating. There was a blood stain under her head. No other injuries were noticeable at first glance. Armando looked around carefully. As far as the snowfall allowed him to see, within 10 meters there was no car that the girl could have fallen out of due to an accident, and there was no other reason to explain why she was in the middle of a snowy night road. And anyway, who drives a car almost naked in November? There was no time to think of any theories. The girl was in a critical condition. She needed immediate help. There was no point in calling an ambulance. By the time they got there, it would be too late. Armando went back to the car, opened the back door, then took the girl in his arms and carefully put her inside. He turned on his phone and dialed a number. Gisela Vincente, how is Toro doing? Has he started the surgery? Good. When he's finished, tell him not to relax. I'll be right there, I need his help. No. Something happened to me on the way. I'll tell you about it later. The girl with the craniocerebral injury, we have to do a CT scan and take all the tests urgently. She may need surgery. No, Gisela Vincente, I'm all right. I was not involved in any accident, and I didn't even witness it. I found her in this condition in the middle of the road. Anyway, I'll be at the hospital in about 30 minutes and I'll explain everything there. All right, wait for us. Armando's heart kept pounding in his chest. If it had not been for the moose, who knows if he would have seen this girl on the road or driven over her in the dark. Probably he would not have seen her. That moose was on the road just in time. If the girl will recover, she would have to put up a monument to the moose. Armando turned around and drove in the opposite direction. This time he drove fast, not paying attention to the snow. He had so much adrenaline in his body that now he could see every object on the road and control himself as he did during the most difficult surgeries. Sergio was already standing outside the hospital with a stretcher. The two of them carefully moved the girl's body onto the stretcher and made their way to the MRI scanner. Gisela Vincente and a nurse caught up with them in the MRI room. They took a quick look at the girl, checked her blood pressure, took blood from a vein, and did a test. An MRI showed a serious craniocerebral injury, but it didn't require surgery. The bone was slightly shattered, and the brain was bruised, but it wasn't critical. However, Armando didn't like the look of the girl. There was some other reason for her bad condition. She was almost in a coma. He requested an ultrasound of her heart and abdomen. Who knows how long she had been lying on the pavement at 7 degrees below zero. Her kidneys or liver could have been seriously damaged. The ultrasound showed a problem with her kidneys, and it was not caused by the cold. The reason was far in the past. A more thorough examination was necessary here. But at this point, it was obvious that the girl's kidneys had failed. Treat the wound. Armando commanded again. Is there a bed available? There is one, Nurse Marissa said. Does she have any identification papers? How should we register her? She didn't have anything with her, Armando answered. When I found her, she was only wearing her underwear. Maybe we should call the police. We can keep her till morning, but then we might have some problems if we don't have any papers. Right, Armando agreed, but we can't just leave her outside. We'll sort it out somehow, and I'll call the police myself. And what does Gisela Vincente say? Nothing. What can she say? She is as confused as we are. All right, Marissa said, I'll do whatever you say. Armando left the MRI room and went to the lounge room, and Paulo Toro was already there, excited about his first self-performed surgery. He was greedily drinking strong black coffee from a huge mug. How did it go? Armando asked. Well, it's too early to say anything. I don't want to jinx it. Toro said, extinguishing his cigarette. I'd better be silent for now. Everything will be clear tomorrow. Armando grinned tiredly. Why are you so superstitious, Paulo? He said. It is the easiest of all types of surgeries. It is the easiest for you, but for me, it is the first surgery without anyone's supervision. When you were young, were you as confident as you are now? I probably wasn't. I can't remember those days. It was like 100 years ago. What was that noise in the waiting room? A girl with a head injury and kidney failure. Should we do the surgery? You asked me to stay focused. No, we need to find out all the details first. Thank God, Toro exhaled. I'm still shaking. 2 surgeries in a row are still too much for me. You can relax now, Armando reassured him. Excuse me, I have to make a phone call. He left the room and called the police, explaining briefly what had happened. The police promised him that an investigator and a forensic expert would be at the hospital by morning. It is not clear what use a forensic investigator would be in the morning when there would be no trace of the incident on the road, but Armando was offered no other options. The girl, who was still unconscious, was connected to an artificial kidney. They stitched up the head wound and took additional tests. Her condition has more or less stabilized. At least she will surely make it until the investigator arrives. Armando sat down on a bench in the empty hallway where the fluorescent lights flickered. He didn't feel like talking to anyone. After he ran out of adrenaline in his blood, fatigue came over him with even more force. His eyes were closing, and his thoughts were confused in his head. He fell asleep with his back against the cold wall, shuddering from fragments of nightmares, in which a huge moose appeared before him and stared at him with red, unblinking eyes. He was awakened by a noise in the corridor. Armando looked at his watch. 4 a.m. Soon he saw Gisela Vincente and two men approaching him. "Armando," Gisela said, "these gentlemen are here to talk about the girl." "Hello," one of the men said. He was in his 50s, with a mustache and a flattened nose, as former boxers often have. "Aniceto Benitez," he introduced himself, the investigator. "Let me ask you a couple of questions, and then we'll draw up a report." "Yes, sure." Armando stood up and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you." The other man, who was very young, just nodded and didn't say anything. Apparently, he was a forensic investigator. He had a small plastic case in his hand, similar to a medical case. The conversation was short, Armando outlined to the investigator all the details of what had happened. He even mentioned a moose. The investigator nodded, writing something down in his notebook. "Well," he concluded at the end of the story, "can you show me the place where you found the girl?" "I guess I can," Armando answered uncertainly. "It was dark and snowing. But I'll try to show you roughly where it was." "We need not roughly, but exactly the right place," forensic investigator said. "I will try." They entered the room where the girl was. "So, the girl never regained consciousness?" Aniceto Benitez asked. "No, she didn't." "How bad are her injuries?" "Severe brain injury." "Vidal, do you understand what this is about?" The investigator turned to the forensic expert. "Absolutely," he answered, carefully taking the girl's fingerprints. "I'll also take DNA, maybe we'll find it in the database." "The coma seems to be minor," Armando added. "The pupils react to light. Hopefully, she'll go into a vegetative state." "How long might that last?" "Will she be able to talk?" "I don't know. Maybe a week, maybe more than a month. But she won't be able to talk for a long time anyway. In addition to the injury, she has a serious problem with her kidneys." "What kind of problem?" "Terminal chronic renal failure." "What does that mean?" "She can't live without a hemodialysis machine. If the tests confirm the preliminary diagnosis, she'll need a kidney transplant." "Wow." The investigator shook his head. "This poor girl had such bad luck. Will she survive it all?" "Her body is young, she will fight for life. And we will help as much as we can." "She didn't have any ID?" "No." "No signs of sexual assault?" "Did you check?" "We did, but there was no sign of sexual assault." "I got it. So, are you ready to go to that place right now?" "Sure, let's go." Armando went into the lounge room to get dressed. Red-faced and nervous Gisela Vincente followed him. "Armando, what did they say?" "Well, nothing yet. Now we're going to go to the place where I found her." "Will they find out who she is?" "How should I know?" "They'll try. But what are we supposed to do?" "We can only hope that she wakes up, and then everything will be clear." "Armando, don't say wakes up. I hope we can get her into a vegetative state. It's going to take a long time to treat her. The committee will be here soon. What should I tell them?" "Don't tell them anything yet. After all, they are coming to check the wards of patients with coronavirus. Why would they care about this section?" I don't know, Armando. They might decide to check all the wards. I don't feel well. I have a bad feeling. Why are you all so superstitious today? Toro says the same thing today. What did Toro say? Come on, Gisela, everything will be fine, don't worry. Okay, I have to go. Good luck. A pale Gisela said in a trembling voice. Gisela, please, relax. Armando was indignant. He frowned and left the room. He managed to find the place where he found the girl. There were traces of blood because city services had not yet had time to clean the road. Forensic investigator Vidal took all the necessary samples, took measurements, and photographed every detail. Even Armando's car was checked for signs of a possible accident. Do you think I did it? Armando asked, pointing with his eyes at the forensic expert. That's our job, Armando, you have to understand it. It's important to check even the most unbelievable versions. Yes, right. Of course, the doctor agreed, I understand that. At that moment his phone rang, the number was unfamiliar. Hello, I'm listening. Armando Borrego? Armando didn't recognize the voice on the phone either. Yes, it's me. Where are you? Are you all right? Who's asking? Major says. Tell me, where are you now? At work. Is everything all right? Why are you calling me? Okay. There was some noise and worried people's voices on the other end of the line. Tell me, did anyone else live in your apartment besides you? Major, I don't understand why you're asking me all these questions. Can you explain? Yes, of course. I'm sorry. Here's the thing. I guess you don't know yet. Anyway, I think you'd better come over to your place right now. Then you'll see everything. Well, Armando was getting worried. I can't come right now. Would you be so kind as to explain everything to me over the phone? All right, the major hesitated for a second. You live in apartment number 43, right? Yes, right. A gas cylinder exploded in the apartment downstairs. What? Armando froze in place. Gas. Explosion. 3 apartments are completely destroyed. We're working through the rubble right now, calling the residents. Thank God, no victims. Only a granny on the 3rd floor was injured. But still, you'd better come. Armando was still not thinking straight after the events of last night. And now, his mind refused to work at all. Too many things happened in such a short time, it just couldn't fit into his mind. Did someone else live with you? The major asked again. No, I lived alone. Well, then you were lucky. If you had been at home, you would have had very little chance of surviving. You must come as soon as you can. All right, I will. Armando turned pale, holding the phone in his hand. Has something happened? The investigator asked. I can't believe it, Armando said in a half-loud voice. What is it? There was a gas explosion in the apartment downstairs. It's horrible. The major exclaimed. Were there any victims? No, no victims. I have to go home. Can I go? Yes, absolutely. Just sign the report. Are we done here, Vidal? Yes, we're done, the forensic expert replied. I have no more questions for you, Aniceto Benitez continued. If you have any questions or have any news about the girl's condition, here, the investigator held out his business card. Call me anytime. Okay, Armando took the card and put it in his pocket. Goodbye. I'll call you if there's any news. Goodbye. Armando got in the car, started the engine, and drove home, trying to calm the uncontrollable thoughts in his head. A sad picture awaited him outside the building. It was clear that there was nothing left of his apartment. It completely collapsed to the floor below with all its contents. His bed, on which he was going to sleep that night, was standing upright and was crushed to the side by a heavy stove. The major told the truth. There was no chance to survive. He found Major says and asked what he should do now. They'll provide you with a room in a hotel nearby, he said. You'll have to stay there for a while. Don't worry about the papers and the stuff that survived. Everything that survived will be returned to the owners. We'll call you when the necessary procedures and investigative actions have been carried out. Meanwhile, go to the city administration. If you don't have a passport with you, show your driver's license. They will explain everything to you in detail, and in the evening you will already be in the hotel. And what about the apartments? Armando pointed to the building. Can they be restored or what? I can't say anything yet. The specialists will figure it out. The main thing is that everyone is alive. Don't worry, they won't leave you without a place to live in any case. Until the evening, Armando walked from one office of the city administration to another, signing a bunch of papers. After the paperwork was done, he finally made it to the hotel. His room was small but very comfortable. There was everything he needed except for the internet. Even lunch and dinner were free. The co-workers even offered to chip in for a rented apartment in case something went wrong at the hotel. Armando tried to stay calm. He assured everyone that he would cope with the problem himself. However, he was sincerely expressing his gratitude for their care. By the evening, he was very tired from the stressful shift. He didn't want to go back to the hotel. A couple of times he checked on the girl he had saved, asking Nurse Marissa if she had regained consciousness at least for a minute. Marissa shook her head in the negative. Gisela paced the wards and corridors more gloomy than ever. She hated the whole situation with the new patient more and more with each passing hour. She looked at Armando obliquely but didn't say anything. This made Armando feel more and more guilty, as if it was him who had hit the girl on the road, hid her in the hospital, and then blew up his own apartment. He felt depressed, and he didn't know how to dispel this darkness so that the sun would shine in his life again. Paulo Toro, watching the torments of his mentor during the entire day, could not stand it anymore and suggested that Armando come to visit him in the evening. He lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment, 3 blocks from the hotel. Armando agreed he needed to talk to someone, and Paulo turned out to be a good, sincere guy, and, most importantly, he knew the line, which should never be crossed in personal, soul-saving conversations. They had been comrades for 2 years, since the day when Toro came to the hospital after graduating from the medical academy to learn from an experienced surgeon. Paulo's apartment looked surprisingly comfortable, beautiful curtains, a soft turquoise carpet on the floor, and a huge plasma TV over the fireplace. He even had an aquarium with colorful fish, which Paulo immediately went to feed as soon as they entered. For a young guy who lived alone, the atmosphere was very refined, and Armando immediately told Paulo about it. Paulo brought a bottle of wine, ordered some Japanese food, and they sat down at the table. The conversation was relaxed and friendly, and they moved smoothly from one topic to another. "Have you ever thought about starting a family?" Armando asked when the conversation turned to plans for the future. "Of course, I thought about it," Toro answered. "But I think I need to make some money first. A family means kids, and if you have kids, you need a lot of money." "Well, they won't all appear in one day." Armando objected, feeling the alcohol begin to flow warmly through his body. "All the problems will be solved step by step. It's always scary to think about it. I had similar doubts myself when I was young." "You have never told me about your family, Armando," Paulo remarked. "I don't even know if you are married or not. Were any of your loved ones injured in the explosion?" "No," Armando thought about it. "I was married, but we never had children. She had health problems that prevented her from giving birth. And 4 years ago she died. Yesterday was the anniversary of her death." "Really? I'm sorry, I didn't know about that, sorry." Armando didn't say anything back. "Are your parents alive?" Toro asked after a pause. "My mother lives in the countryside. She's 76 years old. It's quite far from here. I go to see her every summer on vacation. I keep begging her to move to the city, but she refuses." She's stubborn, she's lived there all her life. She only went to the nearest city a couple of times, and she didn't like it there. What about your parents? They live far away, too. I have 2 sisters and an older brother, but he's in the military, I don't see him much. They all have their own families. At that moment Armando got a phone call. The screen of the phone said GV. Hello, Gisela Vincente, he said. Armando, good evening. Although, the evening probably isn't so good. I wanted to talk to you this afternoon, but everyone was bothering you. I thought maybe I could solve the problem myself, but I still haven't. What's the problem? It's the same problem, Armando, the problem with that girl. What about the girl? Armando got tense. Anyway, in the morning I got a call and they told me that in 5 days they were going to bring in an emergency patient with kidney problems. The ICU machine will be needed. There's only one available machine in the hospital. We have to find a solution, but I don't know what to do. I can't say no to them, you know? The person who booked the room is very powerful. Did the investigator find out who the girl is? No one's called yet, Gisela. Do you have any suggestions? I don't know, Armando. We have to take her somewhere. I had a premonition we'd have problems with her. Where should we take her? Armando raised his voice a little. First of all, she's the only witness so far. And secondly, we should not move her. She will not survive the transportation. Yes, I understand, Armando. You have to talk to the investigator. Maybe they will find some relatives. Then we'll have time to do the transplant. There's no other way, Armando. Think about it, because I don't know what else to do. Okay, Gisela, I'll think about it. Don't rush yet, we'll find a way out. Yes, Armando, find a solution and hurry up. Gisela said and hung up. What happened with the girl? Did something go wrong? Paulo asked when Armando put away the phone. In 5 days, the room the girl is in needs to be vacated and prepared for an important patient. Wait, I'll make a call, and he looked for a business card and dialed the investigator. But the investigator had no new information. Surveillance cameras at gas stations and stores near the highway did not capture the stranger. No reports of a missing person had been filed. It was as if she had just dropped out of the sky, not a single trace. And no fingerprints were found in the database, nor was her DNA. Wow! Toro was surprised when Armando told him the details of the conversation. If she were a criminal, she would have been quickly recognized. And a law-abiding person is not so easy to find. Armando, there is only one solution. What solution? A transplant. We need a donor. We certainly need a donor, but where to find one? Armando shook his hands. By law, only relatives can be donors. Even husband or wife are not allowed to be donors. But anyway, you're right, there's only one way out. Moving her somewhere is just a deliberate murder, and I won't let that happen. She saved my life. If I hadn't found her on the road, I would be trapped under rubble in my apartment. Yeah, Toro agreed. You would most likely have died. If you saw what my bed looked like, you'd be speechless. And the girl was saved by a moose, can you imagine? If it hadn't been for the moose, I would have just driven over her due to the snowfall. It's all so strange. If anyone had told me that story, I wouldn't have believed it. And it turns out that I'm the only one who's responsible for the girl now. I sensed it from the start. What shall we do now? Toro asked, and this sounded surprising to Armando. Paulo unconsciously became involved in the situation. He considered himself a part of it. And Armando was very grateful to his companion for this. You know what, Paulo, Armando decided I'll stay at your place tonight. Is it okay? Yes, sure. It's very late, there's no point in going anywhere. Stay here. And tomorrow I'll go to the lab to talk to Lucia. She starts at 7 a.m., right? Right. What are you up to? If all goes well, I might need your help. What kind of help? I'll tell you later. It's too early to talk about it. I have to make some calls first, talk to the right people. Oh, I wish it would all work out. But it has to work out, Paolo, Armando said. Since fate has chosen me, it can't be just a joke. I don't believe it. Okay, it's time to go to bed. Have you become superstitious, too? Okay, Toro said, without asking too many questions. I'll make a bed for you in the living room. In the morning, Armando went to the lab at the hospital without even saying goodbye to Paolo, who was still sound asleep. Lucia was already there. Armando took his urine and blood for analysis, then went and took x-rays of his kidneys. Just as he had hoped, a comparative analysis with the girl's results was positive. By noon, it was already quite clear that his kidney was a match for the girl. The only thing left was to assemble a team of transplantologists and anesthesiologists in order to organize a transplant in 4 days. Armando had assisted in liver transplantation a couple of times, so he knew a lot about such surgeries. During his work as a surgeon, he got a lot of powerful people who were very grateful to him. He helped some of them with recommendations or helped to find a place in a prestigious clinic and performed surgeries in critical situations. Many powerful people, their wives, and their children owed him their lives to this day. Armando never took money for his services, and even his late wife scolded him for that. Everybody does that. And never once did he ask for anything in return. But now he saw no other option. His university friend, a transplant surgeon specializing in kidney transplantation, agreed to help for a modest fee, but only if he could be guaranteed that there would be no bad consequences. Years ago, Armando turned down a job in the capital for a fellow student and went to work in this city. They were only nominally friends, but Olegario still owed Armando. He had to call the prosecutor if Armando had also helped his son some time ago. The prosecutor promised to protect him in case of any problems. Sooner or later, the girl's relatives would be found anyway. And then it will be possible to work with the papers in a certain way so that everything fits together for the inspecting authorities. But now he had to hurry. His friend, a transplant surgeon, managed to assemble a team and promised to arrive on site in 3 days to prepare everything properly in the operating room. Toro also agreed to help, as did Nurse Marissa. Only Gisela Vincente was nervous and even angry, realizing that if something went wrong, she would simply lose her job. Moreover, she knew that this was a serious violation of the law, and she could even go to jail. She didn't give explicit consent to this desperate step, but she didn't say no either. She told him not to mention it in front of her, as if she knew nothing about his plan. She even got a short-term vacation, making Armando the interim CEO of the hospital. When the commission came to inspect the hospital, she quickly showed them the wards where patients with coronavirus were being treated. Later, she offered them a lavish dinner at an expensive restaurant, violating quarantine regulations, and disappeared. She even turned off her phone. 2 days later, there were 3 pieces of good news waiting for Armando. First, Olegario kept his promise and came to the hospital with a team of 3 doctors. Without asking too many questions, he looked at the scans and tests and was surprised at such a high degree of compatibility between Armando and the girl. He even asked if she was related to him. Olegario, are you kidding? Armando objected. If that was the case, why do we need all this secrecy? The test results are incredible. You know, anything can happen in life. But anyway, you know better. Nothing like that has ever happened in my life, Olegario. And a relative that I don't know about can't suddenly appear either. All in all, this fact, which struck Olegario, was the second good news. And the third thing that particularly pleased Armando was that the girl began to open her eyes and make reflexive movements. After all, her condition went from a deep coma to a vegetative state. The surgery was still complicated, but Olegario had a lot of experience, and the anesthesiologist who came with him was no less experienced. In addition, Armando's apartment could be repaired, and in a few weeks, the repairs were to be finished. Now all that was left to do was to pray that the surgery would be successful. Gisela Vincente kept hiding from her coworkers and remained unavailable by phone. Everyone resented her for her cowardice. It took another day to prepare for the transplant. Armando signed all the necessary papers where the girl was registered as his daughter. They did not enter her first and last name yet, leaving an empty space. Armando also signed a paper stating that in case of failure, he would be the only person responsible for breaking the law. The whole team realized that this paper will not protect them from responsibility, but there were no other options. Paulo Toro was more worried than the others. Armando tried his best to make him optimistic and even suggested that he should be operated on under local anesthesia. But Olegario categorically refused this idea. It would not help Toro anyway, but Armando could involuntarily stress himself and thereby additionally overload his not-so-young body. Everyone was aware of how much they were risking. In case of a bad outcome, it would be impossible to explain what had happened. In this case, even a prosecutor will not be able to help them. Maybe in a year or two, they would be able to resolve everything at the cost of nerves and money, but they realized they could lose their licenses or even go to jail. And Armando, as the initiator of this venture, risked more than anyone else. Olegario did not say a word about the possible consequences. Either he was so confident in his professionalism, or he knew that he had a debt to repay. And he was sincerely paying his debt. He was doing this because Armando had once given up his prestigious position to him. Marissa was the most excited. She marveled at what Armando had done because it was the only way out. All other ways led to the death of the unknown girl. Everyone knew that Marissa was a very romantic person, which is not often the case for medical professionals, especially experienced ones. And only Lucia knew that this fragile, romantic girl also came to the lab and tested compatibility for donation. The result was negative, even her blood type was different. The atmosphere of some mysterious miracle that was about to happen was in the air. On the day of the surgery, everyone became superstitious. They prayed in the shower and touched their talismans hidden in secret places unknown to anyone except the owner. The last words of the anesthesiologist sounded as if from a distance, losing their clear meaning. Armando opened his eyes once more to look at Toro, who was focused and serious. Noticing that Armando looked at him questioningly, he nodded slightly. Armando calmed down and fell asleep. Armando's awakening was painful. His consciousness could not adjust its focus in any way. The girl was lying on the next bed to the left. The window in the ICU room was open, and it was really cold in the room. "Wake up, Armando," the voice came from Marissa. Armando recognized her. He looked to the right and saw a nurse in a medical uniform, wearing a pink sweater underneath. She was looking at him with a smile. So, Armando's words sounded uncertain and hoarse. "Everything went well?" "Everything's fine," Marissa confirmed and closed the window. "Is Olegario still here?" "When did the surgery end?" 2 hours ago. "The doctor is still here. He and his team will leave in the evening." "Should I call the doctor?" "Yes, call him, please." Marissa left, and 10 minutes later Olegario showed up. "Well, Armando, how do you feel?" he asked right away. "I'm fine. I'm not thinking straight yet. I've never been in a patient's shoes." "Good experience. What about the girl? How'd the surgery go?" "She's stable, and her kidney's working. Everything is normal in that sense. The complications occurred in a slightly different part." "What happened?" "Gisela Vincente will tell you. I just want to say, don't blame yourself, no matter what happens next. I knew what I was doing, and I have no complaints against you. Keep that in mind, and we'll sort it out as we go along." "I don't understand," Armando frowned. "What's the problem?" "Gisela will come to you later and tell you everything. I don't know all the details yet." "All right, Armando, I have to go. I have to leave in the evening. We have surgery the day after tomorrow." "Okay. Thank you, Olegario. I'm forever indebted to you. Don't worry about it, and don't rush it. Let everything settle down. Bye." And Olegario left, leaving Armando completely bewildered. By lunchtime, he felt better. Marissa was bustling around him and that girl. But she could not answer any questions about the problems that Olegario was hinting at, either because she knew nothing or she pretended as if she didn't understand. The situation was clarified only by Gisela Vincente, who appeared in the room only at 4 p.m. and asked Marissa to leave them alone because she needed to talk to Armando. "Armando," she said, "I understand everything. You saved a situation that seemed hopeless. You're just incredibly lucky. I don't know what gods you prayed to, but they were on your side. But try to imagine yourselves in my shoes. Do you have any idea what would have happened to me if the result had been the opposite? You'd be retired in 6 months, and you can even get a disability, but I could have gone to jail. And I have to support my grandchildren. My older daughter, she filed for divorce. Do you have any idea how hard it is to raise and provide for children? No, you don't know anything about it. Anyway, I couldn't stand it. Even if you curse me, I won't ask you to forgive me." "Wait, Gisela," Armando interrupted her. "I don't understand anything. What happened? Can you be more specific, because everyone is expressing in riddles?" "Yes, of course. More specific," she said. "Yesterday I called the authorities and informed them about what was going on in the hospital. I couldn't stand it. I was so nervous. I couldn't believe the successful outcome of the surgery. Tomorrow investigators and officials from the ministry will come. I just wanted to tell you about it. You will have to be responsible for that. I just wanted you to know that it was me. It's all because of me. I also told Olegario about it. He knows. You should take care of the others, too. Their fate is in your hands. Do you realize how many problems you have caused by your reckless action?" Armando listened to the long monologue of Gisela Vincente and closed his eyes, surprised that everything she said did not bother him at all. The important thing was that the surgery was successful and that girl would live. Now there was no time limit. Now there would be plenty of time and he would sort it all out. At that moment, the problem that seemed apocalyptic to Gisela Vincente looked so insignificant to Armando that he could postpone worrying about it for later. He smiled, and a hot tear rolled down his cheek. "You're just like Blessed Augustine," Gisela said in surprise. "Everyone in this hospital seems to have gone crazy." "Okay, you can keep smiling, but I have to go. Come to your senses and... Anyway, you don't work here anymore. I fired you. Goodbye." "Where am I?" sounded from another bed. Armando opened his eyes and looked to the left. It was the girl's voice. She looked around in confusion. "Where am I?" she said again and then coughed. "Oh my God," Gisela exclaimed as she was about to close the door behind her. "Marissa!" she shouted loudly into the corridor. "Where are you? Come here, hurry up." And Gisela Vincente left the room, not wanting to be involved in anything. Marissa came running and rushed to Armando, but he stopped her, pointing with his hand to the neighboring bed. "Oh my goodness," the nurse exclaimed. She woke up. "Where am I?" the girl kept asking the same question, coughing harder and harder. "At the hospital. You are at the hospital," Marissa ran up to her. "You can cough, just be careful, and please don't try to stand up or make any sharp movements. And don't worry, you're all right. Do you remember your name?" "Nadi," the girl said after thinking for a second. "And what happened? How did I get here?" Marissa's eyes were already wet. "Nothing," she took Nadi's hand and said. "You are safe now. They found you on the road. Do you remember what happened to you? What are your last memories?" "No," the girl shook her head. "It's hard to remember. I have a headache." "Headache? Does it hurt a lot?" "A lot. I'm going to give you an injection. Wait a minute." "Okay," Nadi said and turned her head looking at Armando. Nadi, the man thought to himself. Such a beautiful name. He smiled as he looked at the girl. He could no longer hold back tears. What would happen to him tomorrow or the day after didn't matter to him. It was no big deal. The important thing is what was happening here and now. 2 more days passed. The euphoria of a successful surgery and the rescued girl coming to her senses had faded a little. That euphoria was replaced by a problem in the form of a ministry investigation team that came to the hospital from the capital. Armando was already able to get up and walk around the hospital. Moreover, after he was questioned and signed a statement that he would not leave the city, he returned to the hotel that same evening. He was forbidden to talk to Nadi, and a policeman sent from the capital was on duty outside her room. She was the only witness, and, given the favor Armando did for her, the investigation suggested that he might have had some influence on her testimony. Her new kidney was working properly, her body showed no signs of rejection. Nadi could eat on her own and even walk to the toilet, but the doctors decided to keep her in the intensive care unit for a while. The investigator Gisela Benitez came twice during this time and questioned Nadi in every detail, but he still didn't learn anything about her story. He also talked to the doctor before he left. "Armando Alvarez, I overheard you have a problem," he said. "The main problems are over," he answered, "and I'll handle everything else." The investigator thought for a moment and then said, "You did a great thing for the investigation. You saved the life of the witness. Without her testimony, everything would have remained a mystery for a long time, and most likely we would have never solved the case. I'd like to help you in any way I can if you need anything from my side. Keep that in mind. I understand that a commission from the capital can get you in trouble, so call me anytime." You know, an unexpected thought occurred to Armando. "Perhaps I will have one request for you." "Tell me, I'll do my best." "I have an idea. It may be silly, something like a last attempt to save the situation. But still, it's worth checking out. Armando Alvarez, believe me, there are no silly ideas in such complicated cases. You can't even imagine what insane assumptions turn out to be the only right ones. So, feel free to tell me what you came up with. You have the result of Nadi's DNA test, right?" Armando asked. "Yes. I'd like to compare my DNA with it." "Really?" The investigator figured it out quickly. "Do you think Nadi might be related to you? I saw in your file that she was listed as your daughter in the medical records. Do I understand you correctly?" "Yes. There's no objective evidence to prove it. But what if there's a chance?" "All right. When you feel better, stop by the police station and talk to Vidal Solar. You already know him. I'll let him know. He'll do it properly." "Thank you, Gisela Benitez." "You're welcome. All the best, and get well soon." And the investigator left. As soon as Armando left the hospital, he was immediately overloaded with so much to do that he couldn't think of anything else for a whole week. At first, he was busy with the apartment, which was about to be repaired. Then it took him a long time to find a lawyer who would be willing to handle an illegal surgery case, and there wasn't enough strength yet to keep up with everything. Armando returned to the hotel in the evening exhausted and fell asleep immediately so that in the morning he could start fighting for his freedom and his life again. And the conversation with Nadi seemed more and more necessary. Gisela Benitez was right. Armando's stupid assumption was 100% correct. Or rather, 99.9%. His DNA matched Nadi's by 99.9%, which meant that she was his biological daughter. It seemed absolutely impossible, but Vidal had checked 3 times. Now it was an undeniable fact. It certainly turned the whole case about the illegal surgery in his favor, but he still had to make an official request for analysis at an independent lab, attach it to the case, and convince a lot of people. It could even take a year, at least that was what the lawyer told him. And yet, the black stripe that had begun on the road, when he braked the car in front of a moose that had gotten in his way, was over, and now everything around him was just blinding his mind with a crystal white hue. Now even Armando, who was a skeptic, believed in miracles. How else could everything that was going on be explained? But the rational reasons must have existed, and Armando searched intensively, getting into the most secluded corners of his past. And he found them. Strangely enough, he had completely forgotten about an episode that had happened 23 years ago. At that time, he and his wife desperately wanted to have a baby. His wife visited the best clinics, at the same time going to other healers in remote forests and villages, and Armando became a true believer, praying in all types of temples to the Almighty to show them His mercy. He lit candles in churches, paid donations, and spoke to priests and to people who claimed that a similar miracle had happened to them. Armando even became a donor, believing it would be fair to share the chance to have children with others. But his prayers didn't seem to reach the Lord. Or maybe the Lord had completely different plans for Armando. Clinics and healers were powerless, too. That time it was their last attempt. After that, they accepted the situation and never talked about it again. Later, they even considered adopting someone. His wife wanted a girl. But soon his wife became ill, and they did not have time for a child. Armando suddenly remembered it in the middle of the night. With a pounding heart, he jumped out of bed and started pacing the room from corner to corner, not knowing how to control the urge to shout out loud about his discovery. He took the phone and wanted to call Toro, but when he looked at his watch, he stopped himself. He couldn't fall asleep again until morning, and the first thing he did was go to Aniceto Benitez to get permission to talk to Nati. The DNA tests were included in the case, which Aniceto Benitez handled himself. He completely changed the course of the case, so there was no reason to forbid Armando to have contact with the witness. So Aniceto Benitez gave permission. Armando immediately drove to the hospital. On the way, he bought a beautiful bouquet of flowers and kept thinking about what he would say to his unexpectedly found daughter. But he still couldn't find the words that felt right to him. In the corridor, Armando met Gisela Vincente. She lowered her eyes and walked past him without even saying hello. Armando had no hard feelings for her, he just didn't want to think about her for a second. The policeman at the entrance to the ward looked at the permission and let him in. Nati was alone in the room. When she looked at the visitor and recognized him as her savior, she smiled. "Hello," she said quietly. "Hello, Nati," Armando said excitedly. "So, we can finally talk. How are you?" "I'm fine. Were you allowed to talk to me? Is the investigation over?" "Oh, I'm sorry, that's not what I have to say. First of all, I want to thank you very much. I don't know what I did to deserve such a sacrifice from you." "Don't, Nati," Armando interrupted her. "You don't have to thank me, but I have to thank fate for bringing us together." She looked at him in surprise. "I do not quite understand you," she said. "Excuse me, have I missed something?" Armando put the bouquet on the nightstand next to Nati and sat down on a chair next to her bed. "I'll explain everything to you later. In the meantime, can you tell me how you ended up on that road? Did you manage to remember anything?" "Yes, I remember now. I was on my way to the capital, and I had to be there in the morning. I had a meeting with readers there, a last meeting, and the presentation of my new book." Nati fell silent while thinking. "Are you a writer?" Armando asked. "Yes." The diagnosis was clear. There was a month left to live, so I was summarizing my life. "What about your relatives?" Armando interrupted her again. "Do you have relatives? Was the transplant possible?" "I have only Mom, but she also has kidney problems. There was no way she could become a donor, and I was 133rd on the waiting list for donor organs. You know I wouldn't make it. My mother suffered a lot because of it. When I was already on my way, I got a call that she had been taken to the hospital with a heart attack. It was night and it was snowing heavily. Obviously, I turned around and rushed home, canceling all my appointments. I met a man on the road. He was freezing, dressed lightly, with only a backpack. He needed to get to a nearby neighborhood, so I agreed to give him a ride. He seemed strange to me at once, but I did not pay much attention to this. All my thoughts were about my mother, about the presentation, and the fact that it will probably never happen anymore. An hour later, something happened that I still can't remember in detail. Anyway, this guy decided to just steal my car. He hit me on the head, and I only woke up in the hospital. And how's your mom? Did you call her? She's okay. She's getting better. She's doing more or less fine. I was in such trouble, and you saved me, both then on the road, and later, when you brought me back to life. Now it's your turn to tell. Nadi smiled tiredly again. My story, Armando began, my story will seem fantastic to you. But, believe me, it took me a long time to convince myself that it's not a dream, but a reality. Do you know what are the chances of dying from a shark attack? No. 1 in 264 million. What does that mean? It's even less chance for a donor to meet his biological child. That's how the system works. What? Nadi got up in bed. Are you saying that? Yes, I want to tell you that you are my daughter. I'm sorry it came out so twisted and unexpected for you. Nadi collapsed back onto the pillow and stared at the ceiling. Unbelievable, she mumbled. I guess you're sure of that since you dared to tell me. The DNA test was a 99.9% match. There was no doubt. I knew my mother was artificially impregnated, but I couldn't imagine such a thing. Meeting on a snow-covered highway in the middle of the night, away from the cities, and under such circumstances, and with such an outcome. Unbelievable. She repeated again. I agree, Armando said, unbelievable, but it's a fact. It's been 5 years. There was a lot of snow in the winter park this year, and the kids were making snowmen. They even had a contest to see who could do it better. Armando, dear, come to mommy, you're covered in snow from head to toe. The 3-year-old toddler turned around and waved his hand. I'm with Grandpa, he lets me play. Nadi, come on, let him play some more, please. In 20 minutes Paolo will finish the surgery, and we will go home together, Armando Sr. smiled, looking at his grandson. And Nadi just sighed and continued the conversation with the nurse Marissa. They had become good friends, and now discussed the new purchases. Ah, there's Paolo. Armando smiled when he saw his son-in-law. Toro is a good guy, kind and decent. And Nadi feels safe with him, just like behind the stone wall. And Grandpa Armando will always help them if they need his help. He can babysit his grandson or visit Nadi's mother and help with household chores. After all, they are family. They are involuntary relatives, but still, they are a real family. Armando had never even dreamed of such a family and planned to live the rest of his life alone. But it turned out amazingly. Miracles happen.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.